All right, I've got 3:45, folks, so we'll go ahead and get started. Take your seats or, all right. Okay, welcome to the Coastal Shark Management Board meeting. I'm Mel Bell, the chair. We'll get us going here. We're actually a little bit early, which is good. And we do have a hard stop for the awards ceremony, so we'll get us going here. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Are there any additions to the agenda? And I will say I know of 2 items right now. I have people have contacted me about things under other business, but is there any other modifications of the agenda required? Oh, yeah, and I'll mention right now, item 5, we're not going to deal with that today. We're not ready for that. So we're going to either postpone to email or we will deal with it at the summer meeting, but we're not going to deal with the acting on the plan review today. Other than that, any modifications to the agenda? Yes, Eric? No. Would you like to be third? Okay. All right. Gotcha. All righty. So I've got 3 items for other business then. All right. Yes, Jim.
Just a reservation right now. I think the issue that we're concerned about in New York with thresher shark may come up during some of the discussion. So if it doesn't, I may bring it up in other business. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. So no other adjustments to the agenda. Then is there any objection to approval of the agenda? Don't see any objection. So the agenda stands approved by consent. Next is approval of the proceedings from the November 2022 meeting. Any edits required for the proceedings? Don't see any hands. Any objections to approval? Don't see any hands. So the November 2022 proceedings stand approved by consent. That takes us to public comment. This would be public comment on anything not on the agenda. Is there anyone here in the public? Don't see any hands. We have anybody online? No hands there either. Okay, so we'll move right into our first and main and primary item, which will be a presentation from Carol Brewster-Geist from North Fisheries HMS. And she's got I call it a congealed salad of HMS things to bring up here. But it's a few different things going on there that she'll brief us on. So we can run through that. We can take questions as as you're ready, or that sort of thing.
All right.
Okay. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, everyone. It's good to see everybody here around the table, and I'm sure there are people virtually as well. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Carol Brewster-Geist. I work for the Highly Migratory Species Management Division of NOAA Fisheries. I am joined today by a number of colleagues who are sitting in the back, and I think there are a few online as well. So we don't often have a lot to share with all of you. I know we've been working on a number of items for a number of years, but as our chair told you, I have a lot to go through today. So we have several completed items that I wanted to just give you updates on and explain what they are, and then a number of proposed or upcoming actions as well. Some of these actions have not yet been published, so you are seeing an early version of what I hope might be. So starting with the completed actions. Our first one is Amendment 14 to our federal highly migratory species fishery management plan. This is an amendment that we've been working on for a number of years. We finally published it in January, and it establishes a framework, first and foremost, for coming up with acceptable biological catch for all of our shark species. And it is based on a tiered approach, which is something a lot of our fishery management councils have also followed. It also allows for a phase-in of those acceptable biological catches. It will allow us to actively manage not just the commercial fishery, like we've been doing for years, but also the recreational fishery. In other words, we will be setting commercial and recreational quotas. It will be changing how we deal with the commercial quotas in that there will no longer be quota linkages. If you remember right now, when our large coastal fishery closes, the hammerhead fishery closes as well because those quotas are linked. In Amendment 14, we're removing those quota linkages. We're also changing how we're going to handle carryovers, and we are changing how we'll deal with overfishing status in between stock assessments. Nothing in Amendment 14 is actually in place yet. Amendment 14 didn't have any regulations attached to it. Instead, we're going to be working on Amendment 16 to implement all of these changes. And I will be talking about Amendment 16 in just a few minutes. The other document that we finalized is what we like to call our share document, or the Shark Fishery Review. We finalized this in March, and it is a very large document with a lot of data in it, where we are looking at the entire shark fishery as a whole. We're not looking at the stock statuses, we are looking at the fishery. So how is the commercial aspect going? How is the recreational aspect? What are the dealers doing? Are the permits okay? Just the whole kit and caboodle to see how things are going. Overall, it came up with a number of suggestions and ways for us to move forward, including things like changing our permit structure. So right now we have directed limited access permits and incidental limited access permits, possibly changing those incidental permits to open access permits to allow more access into the fishery. Changing commercial retention limits, perhaps changing regional or sub-regional quotas or the recreational size and retention limits. In addition to looking inward at our fisheries, we also looked at some of the external factors that within HMS we can't control, but we do weigh in on. Things like the CITES listings, things like all of the state fin bans, or more recently the national fin ban, and how all of that impacted it. So in result of some of that, we are planning on improving our communication even more than we have in the past. If you remember with things like dusky sharks, we really tried to increase how much communication and outreach we had out there regarding sharks. We are trying to improve that even more. So some of you may have been aware that we just had a shark art contest in celebration of 30 years of the federal shark fishery management plan. You will see more and more coming out this summer in regard to that 30-year celebration, and that's one of our first steps in increasing this communication. But a lot of these potential ways forward for sharks, you'll see echoed in Amendment 16, which again, is something I'm coming to soon. So, and I just realized I keep forgetting to say next, so I apologize. So, I don't have it connected. So proposed and upcoming actions. This is getting into the meat of where I'm really looking forward to what kind of comments and suggestions all of you have. So our next slide is regarding our proposed action for oceanic whitetip and hammerhead sharks. This is a proposed rule. The comment period is open until May 22nd. We did this proposed rule as a result of two biological opinions that we had on our fisheries. Biological opinions are something that is required under Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act. And both oceanic whitetip and a portion of the hammerhead shark, scalloped hammerhead shark population are listed as threatened. It's threatened, not endangered, but threatened under the Endangered Species Act. So oceanic whitetip is listed as threatened throughout its range, and scalloped hammerhead is listed as threatened in the central and southwest Atlantic distinct population segment, and that segment overlaps U.S. waters around Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So that distinct population segment is not really something that this body is concerned about, but we did put forward an alternative of prohibiting the retention of scalloped hammerheads across its range within our waters. So I did want to raise that to all of you, that that is an option we looked at. Because of these biological opinions, we are proposing to add oceanic white-tip sharks to the prohibited shark species group. So that would mean no more retention or anything regarding oceanic white-tip. For the most part, most people, well, one, we haven't had landings in years, but two, most of our fishermen can't keep them anyway. This would just formalize that aspect of it. Regarding scalloped hammerhead, because of the difficulty in telling the difference between scalloped, great, and smooth, we are proposing to prohibit the retention, commercial and recreational, of great, smooth, and scalloped in the U.S. Caribbean. As I said, we do have an alternative looking at prohibiting the retention throughout the range. We are in the middle of public comment right now, and we have received a number of comments requesting that we go forward with that alternative. But that is not what we propose. We propose just the U.S. Caribbean. All right, moving on to the next item, and that is Amendment 16. Amendment 16 is going to be a large rulemaking, and we are starting with scoping. Scoping means that we are looking forward to comments on where people would like to see us go. We are not proposing anything at this time, and in fact, this is not yet out publicly, but we are expecting the notice to publish very soon, hopefully this week or early next week. And when that happens, we are expecting the comment period to end in mid-August. I would very much like comments from this board regarding Amendment 16 and where we could go from here. In short, Amendment 16 would implement Amendment 14. That means it would establish the acceptable biological catch and annual catch limits for all non-prohibited shark species. It would optimize the ability, or at least we hope it would optimize the ability for the commercial and recreational fisheries to harvest their full quota to the extent that we can. Right now, as I think all of you know, we are not landing our shark quotas commercially. It would also increase our management flexibility to react to any additional factors that come through, whether that's switching the proportion between commercial and recreational quotas, whether that's because climate change is shifting where the species are going and we need to allow for more quota to be farther north than south, or anything else that comes up. We're hoping to really improve our management flexibility to react. So I think it's fair to say that Amendment 16 looks at everything, and I mean everything. We are planning on looking at how to establish annual catch limits for all shark species using the tiered system we set up in Amendment 14. As part of that, we are also looking at the management groups. Right now, we have large coastals, we have small coastals, we have smoothhounds. Black nose is pulled out. We have pelagic sharks, but some species are pulled out. Hammerheads is its own management group. Do we want to keep those management groups? Do we want to combine them by what gears species could be landed with? Do we want to combine them by all of these stocks? We are pretty good on what we think the quota is because they've been assessed, versus all of these stocks have not yet been assessed, so we're going to work and come up with a combined. This is opening the door for changing that entire structure. We are considering regional and sub-regional splits right now for some of our stocks, like blacktip, we have a split between the Atlantic and Gulf because the scientists tell us there are two different stocks. But hammerhead sharks, we have the split between Atlantic and Gulf for management purposes. Black-nosed sharks, we actually have a management split in the Atlantic. Anyone north of 34 degrees are not supposed to be landing black-nosed sharks commercially. Maybe that split isn't appropriate anymore, given more and more black-nose are heading further north. So we're opening the door for that. We're looking at the exempted fishing permit quotas. For the most part, we have a 60 metric ton quota for almost all of the species. That hasn't changed since 1999. Maybe that should be looked at. We have pulled out quotas for sandbar and dusky. We've done some things for, and we have a separate smoothhound quota, but we're looking at that. We're looking at changes for sandbar sharks, and therefore we are also looking at changes for the shark research fishery and how that might work in the future. Commercial retention limits, once we start playing with the quotas, that retention limit we have of the maximum of 55 large coastal and hammerhead sharks may not be appropriate. So maybe we need to change those. And then recreational retention limits and size limits also might be open for changing. So again, this is scoping. We are opening the door wide open. It doesn't mean that in the proposed rule we'll take on all of this, but as with so many things with sharks, once you start pulling on one thread, the whole thing tends to unravel. So we need to look at it as a whole. I do want to provide one example of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the annual catch limits and the acceptable biological catch. If you all remember, a few years ago, we did an Atlantic blacktip stock assessment. That stock assessment is a gold star of all stock assessments. It has all the bells and whistles. It's really a really good example of a stock assessment. It gave us an overfishing limit of over 400 metric tons. Using the tier structure in Amendment 14, it comes out to be a tier 1 stock assessment. So then we apply the numbers there for an ABC control rule. And if we look at using an HMS risk policy of 70%, meaning we are 70% sure that we will not be overfished or overfishing within a certain time frame, that reduces the OFL to an ABC of just over 300 metric tons. We include a management buffer, comes up with an ACL, which would then be split between the commercial side and the recreational side. And at the moment, for commercially, we are landing approximately 38% of that potential quota and 89% of the potential recreational quota. So where do we go from here once we set it up? We have not yet proposed anything. We have not yet used the stock assessment, but that is just one of the examples that we're looking at in Amendment 16. All right, moving on to another rulemaking, electronic reporting. I know many of you are aware of electronic reporting through the Fishery Management Councils, SMFC, there's E-Trips, and HMS. For our commercial fishery, we have e-dealer. We are looking at implementing electronic reporting throughout our HMS fisheries and trying our best to make it consistent in terms of how and timing and all of that with all the councils and the different states. And so this rulemaking, again, it's not, the notice isn't quite out, but I hope it will be out within a week or two. Comment period would end in mid-August. The main purpose of this rulemaking is to streamline and modernize our logbook reporting, but it may include requiring reporting of people who do not or have not traditionally had to report their HMS. That might include, for example, charter headboat fishermen fishing for sharks. They might need to start reporting. So it could affect this body and what I come back later and ask. Last rulemaking that I'll be talking about is Amendment 15. This is a proposed rule that we actually just released yesterday. The rule will publish in the Federal Register on Friday, but an early version of the rule is available on our webpage along with the draft environmental impact statement. It is a very large document. It is very complex and it does a lot of things. I'm going to focus primarily on what it does that could affect this body, but recognizing it will affect probably fishermen in all of your states as well for other things. So the two things this rule does is it looks at our spatial management areas. We have 4 of them. One is the bottom long line shark closure off of North Carolina. And then we have 3 pelagic long line areas along the East Coast and in the Gulf of Mexico. And we are looking at whether or not these areas need to be modified in order to collect data, and how would we collect data while continuing to watch out for bycatch and bycatch mortality. And then the other thing this rule does is it proposes shifting the cost of our pelagic longline electronic monitoring system from the agency to the vessels. So to be clear, this is the sampling costs, not the administrative costs of running the program. So we looked at a number of issues. We looked at evaluating the areas or the A alternatives. We looked at how to collect data within those areas. And then we looked at how often do we need to reevaluate the areas or the C alternatives. So for this particular body, I decided to focus on our Mid-Atlantic shark area. This is an area that is currently closed off the state of North Carolina from January through July of every year. It was designed to protect sandbar sharks and dusky sharks. And so if you look at this red area, the hatched part of it is the current closed area. And in Amendment 15, we are looking to extend that eastern boundary. And we are also looking to shift the timing from January through July to November through May. And some of you may be wondering, well, why? How did we come up with that? We actually worked with a model we designed specifically for HMS that we call PRISM. All of the details of that are on our webpage, but in short, it takes a look at all of the observer data we have, and it compares that observer data to environmental data that's been collected, such as sea surface temperature, pH, chlorophyll 8, all of that, to predict interactions between the fishing gear and the environment and what the environment is showing. So we are proposing that based on the results of that spatial model. We are looking for a lot of these areas. We have split them into high bycatch risk areas and low bycatch risk areas, and we have different monitoring within them. For this particular area, we are not proposing any split between high and low bycatch risk areas. So this entire area is a high bycatch risk because it is very likely you will catch sandbar and dusky in it during those time frames. And we are maintaining the current data collection program for it, which is primarily the shark research fishery. And then we are proposing to evaluate this area every 3 years, unless there is some other trigger that comes up that requires us to take a look sooner. As I said, we also proposed a number of other changes for our other closed areas. You can see for the Charleston Bump and the East Florida coast closures, there's both red areas and yellow areas. Those yellow areas are low bycatch areas, where we are proposing different ways of monitoring and allowing fishermen to go in and fish in those areas. I mentioned the EM sampling costs, switching that from the agency to the industry. We're proposing to do that over a phased 3 years. And lastly, we are proposing changes to our regulatory text to make it clear that if we implement other spatial management areas, we would be following a similar approach that we are proposing for all of these alternatives. So that's Amendment 15 in a nutshell. There's a lot more detail. That's pretty much all of what I had to share. I've provided the web pages, or what will be the expected web pages for Amendment 16 and our electronic reporting. And then if there are questions, that's what I'm here for.
Okay, thank you, Carol. To say that that's a lot, it's kind of an understatement. That is a lot. So she went through quite a bit there. Obviously, there's some pretty significant things coming, some changes, and some of it's early. Like I said, we're not really technically into the scoping, but I know you're looking for, any feedback you might be able to get from us at this point, particularly related to maybe 16, or that is still kind of early. When is our next meeting scheduled? Just the date?
First week of August.
But you'd mentioned wanting something again from us by mid-August. So, I mean, we can get another swing at it, I guess, in August as well.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any questions? That was an awful lot. That was, sure. Yeah, John Clark, and then Chris and Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Carol. Could you just say a little more about sandbar sharks? I mean, not that we have, I mean, we've seen them coming back in Delaware Bay, and just curious as to their status is going to change from research kind of prohibited to a more open fishery.
Thanks for that. So sandbar sharks, we also have a stock assessment that we've been waiting for Amendment 14 in order to implement. That stock assessment showed that sandbar sharks continue to be overfished, but they are slightly ahead of schedule in terms of rebuilding, which is great news. So there is a possibility of looking through and following that tree, if you would, to come up with different quota levels. Small possibility we might be able to possibly allow some sandbar sharks outside the shark research fishery. And so that is what we are looking for and looking for comments on. It would probably be a small amount. It wouldn't be a huge quota like the others, but yep.
Kill your mic. Okay, I've got a line here. Next, Chris Bat Savage, and then Mike Luisi, then Jim Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Carol. 2 questions. I think I heard earlier, and it might have been regarding Amendment 16, looking at management flexibility, and you mentioned commercial and recreational allocations. Did I understand it correctly that you're, I guess, considering being able to kind of dynamically change those as conditions change, or are you looking at maybe just changing the allocations in the amendment? Just wanted some clarification on that one. I have an unrelated question.
So we're looking for possibly any of those ideas. I think in my head it was, how do we change the allocations if it looks like recreational needs a lot more than what they have, whereas commercial isn't catching what they already have. But it could be changing ocean conditions causing that need.
All right. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. We address allocations quite a bit here and at the council level. It tend to be pretty controversial. I don't know if perhaps having maybe more like options for the public to consider as far as allocations that are set forth in the amendment, with maybe options to transfer surplus quota from one sector to another, like we've done in other fisheries. It just, again, just kind of drawing on experiences we've had here at ASMFC and the councils when it comes to allocations. So second question I had was on the oceanic white-tip sharks. We're considering prohibited harvest or catch. It's listed as threatened, and it just seems odd that it wasn't prohibited in the first place. Can you explain why, as soon as they were listed as threatened under the ESA, that they weren't prohibited take didn't take place at that point?
Kind of. Sorry, I'm not an ESA expert, but my understanding is under ESA, if they wanted to prohibit it directly, they could have, doing something, I think it's called a 7D rule, but I could be wrong on that number. They did not do such a rule for oceanic white-tip, so it was not prohibited specifically through listing under the ESA.
Okay. Mike Luisi?
Mr. Chairman, to the point you made about this is quite an undertaking. My first question is, Carol, and thanks for the presentation. Whose lunch did you steal out of the refrigerator in your office to be tasked with something like this? This is something. I mean, there's a lot here. There's a lot to it, and I hope that this board will be able to offer guidance as it develops. Secondly, and I don't expect an answer to that first question, but secondly, I'd like to just get your feedback on the reporting element, the electronic reporting piece to this. At the Mid-Atlantic Council, we speak often about permit holders and the reports that they need to fill out upon completion of trips, and whether or not they have Northeast permits, Southeast permits, HMS permits. There's always some frustration about having to do multiple permits, and I'm going to screw up the acronym and mess up the project that's currently being worked upon, which synchronizes the different areas and groups. And I assume, but maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming that HMS is in sync with those projects so that a fisherman that comes back to the dock and reports his or her catch can do it in this one-stop shop fashion, rather than to have multiple inputs that go different places. I just don't, if you have any comments on that, that'd be great. I see Carrie is your lead person on that. I can always work with her as well. Thank you.
Yes, Carrie is our lead person on that, and actually is sitting in the back of the room if you wanted to grab her after the fact. But yes, we are in sync with that whole process and trying very hard to implement eventually a one-stop reporting for all HMS with everything else. That's the goal.
All right, thanks. Jim Gilmore.
Yeah, good. All right. I bought the same system because I thought this worked so good for back home, and now I'm starting to, maybe I should return it. Anyway. Actually, it's the 2-question hour. I got one in terms of an immediate concern on management, and then a second one on outreach and education. So let me take the first one. So with the large pelagic survey, it indicates in New York that we're harvesting large pelagics, and with the restrictions on the mako fishery and all the coastal sharks, it appears most of the guys fishing for sharks now are going for common thresher, which is now raising a concern because the data we've reviewed, the size limit right now is 54 inches, which seems to be well below the maturity level of 85 inches. So we need to start looking at, do we need to put some size limits on common thresher if we're suddenly not going to have a problem? So At this point, it's a procedural thing. Is this a joint effort we would do with the commission between the, you're for NOAA and the commission, or how we go about that? But at this point, we're just raising it because we're seeing a concern, and I think we need to start getting some data on what we should be doing with maybe a size limit. If you want to respond to that, and then I'll talk about the other issue.
So I would agree that it is, we have seen some concern about threshers over the years. And now that thresher sharks are really the only pelagic shark that can be landed, that is also concerning. I'm hoping through Amendment 16, we might be able to do something, but thresher shark is also managed through ICAT. So we're limited in all of that as well.
And secondly, for the last 2 years, but particularly this past year, we've had unprecedented issues with interactions between sharks and humans in New York. We actually thought we were ahead of the curve because we did a coordination with all the counties and the towns and the Park Service, whatever, to be prepared for these bathing season. And the week after we had that coordination meeting, we got a couple of shark bites from mostly sand tigers. But we assured the public that we had only had 8 in the last 100 years, so it was not really a big need for concern. And then 3 days later, we had 10 bites from sand tiger sharks, what we believe. And I still said, well, we don't really have much of a concern. And then the following day, a 7-foot juvenile great white washed up in the Hamptons. So the media became all over this, and eventually I ended up doing a press conference with 7 or 8 media outlets. And after I was trying to spin the good news about, well, part of our management is maybe being successful, we have large menhaden populations that they're feeding on, and all this good news, and really they're simple bites, we're not really having fatal interactions. One of the reporters asked me, you mean you did this on purpose? And I didn't know how to answer that question, and it just underscored the issue of the education about this and what we're doing. The public doesn't understand, and it became a bit of a circus because now our enforcement guys are having a lot of difficulty because everybody's grabbing sharks out of the surf thinking they're saving attacks from their kids or whatever when they're actually breaking the law. So we really need to improve on that outreach. So we're trying to do things in the state. But if we keep succeeding, I think other states are going to be having the same problem. And again, some of the states have much more difficult problems than we have in fatalities, but the frequency of interactions is definitely going up as we improve on our management for both the predators and the forage base. So we really need to start looking into that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Sounds like a scary movie. Okay, Erica Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Carol, I don't think anyone can get away with commenting or asking questions right now without saying, how the heck are you all going to do all of this work at once? It is a lot. I am encouraged by Amendment 14 and 16. I'm looking forward to seeing what opportunities that creates for our fishermen. And the electronic reporting slide went by too fast for me to capture all of it. I'm hoping we can get a copy of the presentation because I think there's so many things in here that touch both for Florida, the Gulf and the Atlantic coast, and we're going to be getting lots of questions, I'm sure. I did want to ask about Amendment 15. Given the timing that it came out, I haven't had the opportunity to dig into it. And I know with this body, the North Carolina area might be more relevant, but for Florida, the East Florida closed areas, the area of interest for myself. What information are you hoping to gather through that, and then for what purpose?
So you are asking what information we hope to gather out of that that area and what? Okay, so those areas, Charleston Bump, East Florida Coast, and DeSoto Canyon, were closed right around the year 2000, and they were closed to reduce bycatch and bycatch mortality from the pelagic longline fishery. Since the year 2000, that fishery has changed dramatically. Back then, they were primarily a J-hook fishery. Now they are required to use circle hooks. Back then, swordfish was severely overfished. And now it is completely rebuilt, and we are only landing about 20% of our potential quota. There have been other changes in shark status, changing how the longline fishery fishes, but those areas were closed primarily for bycatch purposes within pelagic longline fishery. With all of those changes, we no longer know if those areas are the appropriate areas to be closed for the bycatch species of concern that we have now. Because they've been closed, and because, particularly as you know, the East Florida Coast one, it's been difficult to get anybody to go in and do research to find out what happens if people use the pelagic longline they're using now in those areas. So we are proposing to keep the areas that we think are still high bycatch risk based on that spatial management closed, while allowing for some ability to fish with the pelagic longline gear as a fisherman in there and collect fishery dependent data to find out, are the bycatch species we're concerned about impacted? And if they are, we would evaluate that, figure that out, and close that area again. If they aren't, we would evaluate it, find that out, and maybe we would possibly in the future reopen it or relax some of the restrictions to that monitoring area. But at the moment, we are just proposing to allow some limited fishing going in to see what happens, because we don't know with the changes in how the fishery is done, what will happen when they go in there.
Thank you, Carol, and we'll be looking into this further. I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you, considering the number of letters FWC has written in opposition to any research activities within this area, that we strongly support this area to remain closed to pelagic longline fishing, and we have in the past. And we'll look into this further, but I don't feel that our position is likely to change.
Thank you.
Okay, Gary Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Carol, thank you for your presentation. I'm going to kind of echo what you just heard from Erica regarding Amendment 15. Multiple Florida governors, the Billfish Foundation, CCA, ASA, IGFA, FWC, have all made it very clear that they don't want a longline fishery off the east coast of Florida. It's a no nursery area for marlin, sailfish, and swordfish. It's also home to the best sailfish fishery in the U.S. And after the issues with the last proposed EFP, I suspect that there's going to be very robust opposition to Amendment 15 from the state of Florida. Thank you.
Any other questions for Carol? Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, I have a question related. Use the example you used with the Mid-Atlantic area with the closure area off of North Carolina. So you guys are using, that's based on the model that you're using. It's probability model for just intercepts with the species and the potential gear in the area. Is that? Oh.
The observer data with environmental data.
Okay. The only other, I was just curious, has that model been peer reviewed?
Yes, we had it. We had the model peer reviewed a year ago. It published, and we have the article available on our webpage along with explanation of it. We also had our approach for using the model to come up with the proposed close or proposed changes to the areas. peer reviewed as well. And those peer reviews are also available on the webpage.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, Emerson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Carol, for your presentation. I have a general question, not related to the presentation. So I'll get started, and Mr. Chairman, if you think it's out of order, I can take this up with Carol at another time. So I'm just trying to understand HMS requirements and ESA and MMP interactions. So am I correct in the understanding that any commercial or recreational vessel that wants to harvest any HMS species has to have an HMS permit, whether they're fishing in state waters or federal waters, and whether or not they have any other federal permits? Is that correct, or is that incorrect?
That is incorrect. It depends upon the species. So if you are fishing for tunas, you are correct. You need an HMS permit wherever you fish, except for 2 states, Mississippi, I'm going to say Connecticut, but I might be wrong on that. Everywhere else, we manage tunas to the shore. But for sharks, we do not manage to the shore. All of you manage to the shore. We only manage in federal waters. So if you want to go fishing for sharks in federal waters, you need an HMS permit. If you have that HMS permit and you are fishing in state waters, you have to follow federal regulations unless the state is more restrictive.
Thank you for that clarification. And I have a couple of questions relative to that. And again, Mr. Chairman, if you think I'm getting far afield here, let me know. So thank you for that clarification. So if a state or federal vessel is fishing in state waters for tunas, they have to have an HMS permit. So those fishermen then, are they covered by a designated, I'm going to say designated, maybe that's not the correct term, the designated takes of ESA and MMP species relative to the tuna fisheries? And I'll, if you want, I can give you the reason why I'm asking this, or I can do a follow-on.
Yeah, if they have a federal HMS permit, they're covered under ESA and MMPA because of those permits.
Even if they're in state waters. Okay. The reason I'm asking this is because recently the BIOP, at least for Northeast species, was just recently changed or rewritten. And I don't know if there's anybody else here from the regional office. So for fisheries that used to be covered under the BIOP and the designated takes for ESA and MMP species, those takes are no longer, takes meaning just even interaction, right? Are no longer covered in state waters. So what I'm being told from the regional office is that some of the experimental gear work that we're doing in state waters where those takes used to be covered by, I'm going to say, the general BIOP for the fisheries, are no longer covered. But now you're telling me that for tunas, those takes are covered. So is that a different BIOP? I'm just trying to straighten this out in my mind in terms of why things used to be covered, why things aren't. I kind of understand that the new BIOP, at least for the Northeast region, excludes state waters now. But how is it then that the federal HMS permit for tunas covers takes in state waters? Thank you.
So I'm not familiar with the Northeast biological opinion, so I can't respond to that. For HMS, we have 2 biological opinions, one for our pelagic longline fishery and one for all of our fisheries outside of the pelagic longline fishery, and that includes all of our tuna fisheries, all of our recreational fisheries, all of our commercial fisheries. So I'm happy to talk more with you about that. But as I said, I don't know anything about the other biological opinion that you are discussing.
Yeah, let's take that offline, maybe, Emerson. That'd be good, though. But thanks for the questions and thanks for being willing to take them on. Anything related specifically to the presentation that Carol's given? And we'll get another shot at this in August. But and I also, in the briefing materials, there are links to websites to provide additional information as well. So thanks for the links to staff and Carol. Anything else related to anything you've heard? I'm personally, I think 16 is going to be, yeah, again, I'll echo that. Good luck with that. But no, it sounds like it's a good opportunity for, to make some changes in the fishery and look at it in a more holistic approach, maybe. And maybe some of the things that we hear about issues with the shark fishery can be addressed. And I'm not sure what's the timetable on that.
So
Okay.
we are hoping for the comment period to end mid to end of August. And then it will probably take us about a year before the proposed rule comes out. And yeah, I now know I shouldn't steal anyone else's lunch from the refrigerator.
Tony?
There are just, well, 2 things. August 18th will come very quickly after the summer meeting. So it would be good if the board perhaps started thinking about things they wanted to comment on, provide that information to Caitlin ahead of the meeting so that we could have a list to discuss at the meeting. And then that way it'll make it much easier for us to draft a letter quickly and get it back. So we can follow up with that. But there are some deadlines that are sooner than August. So the white tip is due on May 22nd. So we need to know if the board would like to comment on the white tips.
Okay, well, good point. While we're here now, any comments specifically about the white tip? The first thing we talked about. Don't see any hands. And again, it's a lot quicker between our meeting and their time deadline. So giving some thought to this ahead of time before we get to the meeting in August would be good. Any comments about any of it? Yeah, Chris.
Travis again. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Probably more of a question for Tony regarding oceanic white tips. So if the final rule comes out and prohibits the take of oceanic white tip, I guess it's then the shark board's decision on whether or not to apply that in state waters, correct? Or do we automatically adopt that through just complementary management? I can't remember all the nuances of Addendum 5 to the Coastal Sharks FMP.
Yeah, I can answer that. I believe you would have to initiate an addendum to adopt that same rule. Tony's not sure if that's correct.
We'd have to look, the board did allow us to move to do board action for some things. I just can't remember if prohibited is one of those actions or not. So we'll look that up.
Okay, good question, Chris. We'll get back to you. Anything else for Carol right now while we have her here? Yeah, Roy Miller.
Mr. Chair, when we adopted regulations to close fisheries for Mako, we didn't go through an addendum, did we? Wasn't that an administrative action? Wouldn't it be the same for white tips?
Yeah, we're giving that some thought here right now.
I think, if I may jump in, with the Mako sharks, it was changing the retention limit to 0, which is, I think, a way the board could move. What we are actually proposing is moving it onto the prohibited species list, which is a slightly different thing. It's more than just a retention limit.
So there may be some nuance to how you do it that allows you to do it without an addendum. Okay, we'll give that some thought. Yeah, Caitlin.
If that proposed rule goes through to a final rule, then we will prepare the information for the board to discuss it at the following board meeting.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. So I have a question about permitting. So which one of these comment periods should I consider making that comment? You probably know what it is. I've asked it a dozen times. It's about the fishermen can get their shark permit online. Dealers have to go in person every 3 years. At what point can dealers be provided the same luxury as fishermen in getting that permit? Thank you.
So that is actually in place now. Any new dealers still need to go in person for the first time, but once you have the dealer permit and have attended one workshop, every 3 years you take it online.
Okay, sorry I missed that, but I won't have to ask it ever again, so thank you.
It happened during the pandemic, so it's understandable.
Yeah, lots of things happened during the pandemic. Okay, thanks, Eric. All right, anything else for Carol right now? Okay, thank you very much for the presentation and again, good luck. And we'll be communicating with you, I'm sure, quite a bit. All righty, let's go ahead to other business. Jim, did that cover you for Thresher? So you're good. So then I've got John Clark, who had an item that he wanted to discuss, and then Eric, you had one.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Carol, you're aware of this one. I wanted to bring up the collecting permit situation. As I mentioned at the last meeting, we've seen a big uptick in our requests for collecting permits, especially for sand tigers. Madeline, could you put up that slide? I mean, just to give an example, I guess that has to be blown up quite a bit, but I think you can see that we've gone from very few sand tigers to a situation where for this year, we've been requested to issue permits that would allow 38 sand tigers. And I spoke to Carol and her team about a month and a half ago, and I think I'm correct, Carol, in saying that everybody who they have to have a display permit, right, from NOAA. So you're keeping tabs on the overall number of sharks being requested for display. But my question was more for how states should coordinate this and what is the number of sharks that we should permit for these displays. And if I could just, knowing the collecting permits that we're getting in Delaware have gone from individual aquariums to a business that gets sharks for aquariums, and brings up another issue that, displaying them anywhere is for educational purposes, of course, but in recent years, when we get the reports, we see Delaware Bay sharks are at SeaWorld Abu Dhabi. They're in a Korea. They're in Vegas at a casino. I mean, they're doing a lot more traveling than I am. But I just was curious as to, again, if there's a way we can coordinate between NOAA Fisheries and the states. And I know in Delaware, when brought this up with some shark researchers in our state, they were concerned about this. I know the last assessment for sand tigers was in the early 2000s. So some of these researchers were wondering whether we were comfortable, whether we should allow this level of take. And also a point they brought up was that a lot of these sand tigers, there's been efforts that are putting transmitter tags in sand tigers in particular, and saying that as part of the permit, can we make sure that those collecting these are scanning for those tags to make sure that those tag sharks aren't going to SeaWorld Abu Dhabi. So that I just wanted to bring it up, and I think the graph there, as you can see, we've had a big increase, not just in requests, but in the number of sand tigers collected. If I'm not mistaken, Carol, you said that NOAA Fisheries has received a request for 40 sand tigers for this year. So Delaware's request this year has not exceeded that, but I'm just curious as to whether other states have issued any collecting permits for sand tigers for aquarium use, and if there's a way, maybe at least informally, we can coordinate our permits so we know what's going on with that. Thanks.
All right, thanks, John. Anything you comment on?
So,
Process.
thank you, John. We issue display permits from all of our states, so Maine through Texas and the Caribbean. Display permits generally tend to go to aquariums, though we do have a few people, as John mentioned, who collect sharks for aquariums to use, and those aquariums are not always United States-based aquariums or even Atlantic coast-based aquariums, but sometimes they are. We tend to issue an authorized collection of a lot more sharks than are typically collected. Although one of the things we noticed when John showed us his numbers up on the screen, that they do not necessarily match, and sometimes his numbers are larger than the numbers we have from all of our collectors. So after having our discussion, we've changed the wording on some of our permits and trying to make it clear for the collectors that our number is the total number, and that they need to report not just federal collections, but also collections that they make in the state, so we can have a sense of those total overall numbers that are being collected. But I echoed John's thoughts in terms of coordination and better coordination.
Yeah, and John, were you kind of looking at some thoughts about coordinating between the states, or were you just kind of talking state, federal? What were you looking at?
Well, I think both. As Carol said, they get the permit. Anybody that wants to collect sharks for display has to get the NOAA Fisheries permit. But then, just as I've learned more since our conversation, I know that the group that's requested the most sand tigers from Delaware, for example, they're not anticipating they're going to be collecting that number because they don't have that number of requests so far. So, but at the same time, they could be, requesting in different places. And then, as I said, one thing I hadn't thought of, but the researchers brought up to me, is that sand tigers have been pretty pretty heavily researched and there's a lot of effort going into tagging them. And if a shark does get collected and sent overseas that turned out to have a tag in it, that would be, you know, a big loss in terms of the research value. So whether either on the, I don't know, can NOAA fisheries require scanning for those tags and prohibit the taking of a tag shark, or is that something that should be done at a state level?
We have not requested that, but generally my understanding, if one of them found a shark with a tag on it, they would report that. The display collectors are actually required by us to put in pit tags. Display aquariums do not generally like spaghetti tags showing up on their sharks, so they wouldn't keep a spaghetti or a pop-up or any of those tags on the shark if they're trying to sell it. And I think it also would show on the shark, so I'm not sure they would actually keep those sharks for display.
I thought the same thing, but I was told that a lot of these transmitter tags that are put in internally, they don't have external tags on them, and that sharks heal up so quickly that there's no scar left, so that the only way you can tell that you've got a tag sand tiger is to actually use one of these scanners. And I don't know, I was told the scanners can be fairly expensive, maybe a couple $1,000s, but considering the numbers that are being requested, I don't think it would be a huge imposition on this one collector in particular to scan for these tags.
Yeah, as I said, we already require that they put pit tags in, so many of those collectors already have scanners to scan for the pit tags.
Right. This is a different type. I was told, you know, again, this is secondhand from what I was told, but I was told that no, it's not a pit tag scanner. It's actually a, you know, something to, it's almost more like a telemetry tag. So you'd almost need a receiver to run it over the shark and see if it's pinging the receiver.
Okay, Mike Luisi, did you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, just real quickly regarding coordination. So we get requests from time to time, but I would recommend to the other states to do what we do and just send it to John. Just forward the request to John and let him handle it. That's all I had.
So we've appointed John as the coastal coordinator for, okay, good deal. Now, John, you know, we coordinate closely with HMS when we get a request for permit. We don't get any numbers like you're seeing, but what we require is that they have the HMS permit, and then whatever they're allowed there is the number they're allowed by us. We don't have any huge numbers, and it's not quite as big a demand, it looks like, as maybe in your waters. But thanks for bringing it up.
Thanks, Mel. And yeah, I was, you know, actually, all kidding aside, Mike, for the time being, you know, I'm sure this is a fairly small scale situation right now. I'd just be curious if your state has gotten requests for sand tigers. Yeah, please do send it to me, and I can tell Carol, because I doubt it's more than a few states that have gotten these requests. And it sounds like in Delaware now with the sand tigers, it's a situation of availability, and from what I was told, there is effort going into making a better like collection transport facility dockside in this one place. So we may be where the effort is concentrated right now. So it'd be more just for my own personal curiosity, and I can pass the information on at this point. But if any other state has gotten requests for sand tiger permits or sandbars, if you wouldn't mind letting me know, I'd be glad to put it together. Thanks.
All right. Yes, and I can't see your name tag because it's a glare. Oh, yes, Mr. Gillingham, got you.
All right, I'm a little bit confused. Unless I'm mistaken, in our management plan, each state has the authority through their commissioner to issue a collection permit. for some of the prohibitive sharks. You're not required to, but they can't possess them unless they have this collection permit. And usually it's a gear thing. They're using a type of gear that they can't legally do in state waters. But in order to, and once they collect that fish, if they, wherever it goes, we're responsible to track that fish for its life. When it dies, they're supposed to let us know. We require they submit annual reports on the status of the shark. A lot of them will keep them for a couple years. They get too big and we send them off to New York, where it seems like the feeding's better. But so I don't understand the problem. And yes, it's been a couple years since I got, it sounds like that typical request that you got, John. It's an enormous number of fish. They're going overseas. We couldn't possibly track. We couldn't comply with the plan we're supposed to comply with. It's pretty simple. And probably they did, it was a fishing operation and fishing was good in Delaware. And I don't think if they're only fishing in state waters, they wouldn't need any HMS permit. So please tell me I'm incorrect or correct, and we'll change how we're handling these things. But we haven't gotten many requests recently. There's a couple of state aquariums that have, in fact, there's only one this year that's got a collection permit. I do know other aquariums within the state, they're getting sharks through a federal permit. Oftentimes it's FIMS has one to fish outside state waters, and they probably prearranged that, but that doesn't require our monitoring of it. So I'll stop there.
All right, thanks. Any other questions on this? I want to make sure we get Eric Reed's other business. But, Erica, you want to weigh in on this real quick?
John, I remember you bringing this up before, and I think one of your concerns was you might approve one collection and then more would come to you and more would come to you. In Florida, we have a robust special activity license program that includes collections for display and educational purposes. A strategy that we use is we issue those permits twice a year, and there's a deadline by which everyone must submit their requests. And then we prioritize the requests based on whether they're going to remain in state, then by the US, and then internationally. So that might be a process that addresses some of your concerns. If you're interested in talking to me more about it, I can get you connected with the folks who run that program.
All right, thanks, Erica. All right, in interest of time, if we can talk afterwards, whatever, if you want to have any more discussions with John or any ideas, but I think it's a good discussion. We've got it on the record. Eric Reed had something he wanted to discuss. We've got about 15 minutes and then we have a hard stop, and I don't want to get something thrown at me by the chairman. So Eric, if you want to go ahead and start us off.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned some kind of gelled shark salad, and I don't want to add to your aspic at this point in the day, but it's about smooth dogfish, whatever you call them, Stelis canis. There is some handling prohibitions for small amounts of sharks, that particular shark. I can't remember exactly what they were, which is another reason I want to address this. If you get smooth dogfish my cooler is about half the size, well, my former cooler is about half the size of this building. If there were 5 sharks in a carton that weren't handled properly down by Chris Savage, I could smell them from here. But if those fish are handled properly at sea, meaning H&G, leave fins on, of course, H&G, and put in a slush tote, they're worth pretty good money now. I mean, the last vessel price I saw, which wasn't too long ago, a week or so ago, they were worth $2, $2.50 a pound. But with the restriction, I'd like to revisit that at some point. And it's all about, producing a quality product to improve the marketability of that particular fish in reasonably small quantities. So that's my request. I don't know if anybody else in, Southern New England has that same issue, but if they're handled properly, they can be worth something. And I think the way things are now for the fishermen, every pound of fish that they catch is valuable to them. So that's my request. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Any comments or observations similar? Dan McKern?
Yeah, we had a public hearing last week up in Massachusetts on summer flounder, and I got a similar request from a participating vessel owner that they would like to see the trip limits increased, just a few more 100 pounds because there is an increased value.
And I wonder if that's a New England thing, or that's actually even beyond, because I've heard, particularly with issues with fins, not being able to deal with fins, or larger sharks are not as popular, and there's more interest in the smaller sharks products. So maybe some effort in general's shifting over to that. I don't know, or demand for product. But thanks for bringing that up. It's a good observations. Any other comments? I don't see any other business to come before the Shark Board this afternoon. Tony?
Back to the smooth hound sharks or smooth dockfish. The states have quotas. I do not believe the commission sets any trip limits for them. It's the state that manages their own quota.
That makes sense, Eric.
Oh, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I think that's Dan's issue. My issue is I want to improve the quality so you can get money for them. And I'm pretty sure we had a conversation about how many, there was a threshold, X amount of pounds versus what you had on board in order to address those sharks at sea. And I would like to address that particular issue because I think it's anti-productive. I mean, like I said, if you don't take care of them, they have a very unique smell from a very long way away. So I'll just leave it at that. But if you can make something out of nothing, if you can take care of them. So.
Yeah, are you asking to make a change to the commission's provision? Do you want staff to pull together a white paper? While it's a 25, it has to be 25% by weight at the time of landing to dress, I believe.
If I could make a motion right now and change it in the next 3 minutes, I'd be a total winner. But I don't think that's appropriate. I don't really want a white paper. I don't need a white paper. I need to sell fish for money. And if it takes a white paper, so be it. But I just think that I think it's important. Because like I said, every pound counts now. So however you want to handle it, Ms. Kearns, that's fine with me, but it's easier is better for me.
I'm just trying to figure out what you want staff to do. You would need to change the provision of the addendum, so we would need to do another addendum. So in order to, are you initiating a new addendum? Are you asking staff to come back with some review of something of that dressed weight?
Let's talk about it over cocktails because I don't want to talk about it now. I mean, it shouldn't be that complicated to improve the marketability of anything. But if that's what it's going to take, then, let me think about it. But that's my intent, is to get something done.
Yeah, I think from a staff perspective, they're just trying to make sure we're responsive to what your request is. And so maybe that'd be a good idea to just kind of talk it over a little bit more and work through some details or something at this point.
It turns out I've already have some offers to work with me on how we're going to make this happen. So.
Okay, way to go. You have anything that you want? Okay.
Thanks for that. So if I remember correctly, this board matched our federal regulations and we implemented those percentages based on the Shark Conservation Act. And that Shark Conservation Act requires fins be naturally attached, but then had a very specific exception for smooth dogfish. And so the percentages this board have matches our Amendment 9 in terms of the federal and the state percentages for the fins. We would have to go through a whole rulemaking to change that. And we would have to find some way of making sure, I'm sorry, I'll stop.
No, it's a legitimate point you brought up, and I think, you know, it's just a little bit perhaps more complex than might have imagined. So I think we can have some offline conversation about maybe where to go. Okay. Anything else to come before the Shark board today? Thank you, Eric, for that. Okay, good. Okay, seeing no hands, they had a motion to adjourn. Yes, John Clark, second from Jim Gilmore. Any objection? Nope, we're adjourned then. Thank you very much.
And just so everyone knows, the annual Awards of Excellence reception will be out here in the foyer and at 5:45 promptly. Mr. Gilmore will be speaking it soon thereafter.